Today I wanted to talk about transcribing and learning jazz language. Now, transcribing and learning jazz solos is basically the best way that we can develop our vocabulary as jazz musicians. And I like to break it down into 4 key steps for my students. And those steps are to transcribe, analyze, free play, and then apply. Now, to demonstrate all 4 of these steps, we're going to use that little lick that I played at the very start. Now, that comes from the first ever jazz solo that I transcribed, which is John Coltrane's solo on Miles Davis's Oleo. Alright, so let's check out the solo. Let me skip through a bit. Alright, this is trained solo now. There's the sound. And he does it again there. So those are the lines. Now, as I mentioned before, the first of those 4 steps is to actually transcribe it and to actually learn the content. Now, when it comes to transcribing, whether you learn the whole solo by ear or whether you get someone else's transcription online, it kind of doesn't really matter. The important bit is that you actually can play it on your instrument and that you actually memorize it and you can play it along. So if we take this little fragment that I was playing before, the bit that I liked about it and the bit that stood out to me is this, that little sound there. Now, this brings us to the second part of the transcription process, which is really important, is to actually analyze and understand the language that you're playing. You know, what are the fundamental, essential qualities of that piece of language that you're playing that make it sound like what it does? In this case, in this phrase, it's that first note, it's actually a chromatic note. So it chromatically approaches a scale tone, and then from there, it's doing an arpeggio. And so the first time I heard this solo, that's what stood out to me. And basically, I played around with this sound a little bit, and what I extrapolated was this lick right here. So that right there is a pattern. I've basically turned the fragment of language into a fully fledged pattern. And I like to call it a chromatic scale tone pattern. So let's take a look at exactly what's going on here. So let me start by explaining the scale tone part of the pattern first. So what we're doing is we're building a pattern from scale tone triads. Now, scale tone triads basically built from stacking thirds from every note of the major scale. So the foundation of playing our pattern comfortably is to be able to play our scale tone triads first. And so on. I might do that over the full range of my instrument and then back down. Now, to turn it into the bebop pattern that we played before, all we do is add a chromatic note at the start of each diatonic triad. So if we have, all we're doing is adding a chromatic note before that first note. And then the next one. And so on. Now, naturally, as part of this analysis step and figuring out this sound is that we want to actually be able to play it. So I would take that pattern now that we've figured it out and worked out why it sounds like it does and analyze it. We're going to play it and get comfortable with it. And then back up. once you can feel comfortable doing this and actually play it up and down without reading it and without thinking too hard about it, once you feel like it's in your muscle memory, feel like you can sort of comfortably say that you've completed the first two steps. You've transcribed it, you've analyzed it, and you can now play it. This is where I find most of my students drop off. They feel like, oh, that's the end of it. That's what I've done, everything I need to do. I've learned the language. I've got it. I've completed it. But in actual fact, there is so much more to do from this point to really internalize it properly. Now, the next step that I encourage everyone to do is just to free play with it. Just stream of consciousness, play it, develop it, see what else comes out of it. Basically, I like to just noodle with these sounds that I discover and with these ideas and see if anything grows from it. So sometimes you might try and adjust it and shape it rhythmically or something like that. You might go, you know, I might just keep going for a bit. You could, you might still do the chromatic bit, but make it a 4-note diatonic shape rather than a 3-note diatonic shape after that. So you go, you know, or you might go do that same shape but as triplets. Or a 2-note shape. You know, the whole idea is that you're working out different ways to play the language and to develop it. And the best way to do that is just to free play with it and follow your ideas. You know, you could just set yourself a timer of like 10, 15 minutes and just play with it. You know, it should be fun and it should be a way to explore the sound creatively. Now, the free play step is a really underrated step because you're basically shaping it to be your own. You're hearing it and finding ways to make it your own sound and to incorporate it in ways that sound good to you. You know, you're not forcing it in as a lick the exact same way that Coltrane played it. So I'd encourage you, to follow your ideas, but as soon as something comes up that you're like, oh, there's a technical difficulty there, you know, turn it into an exercise or something like that. It's a sort of a combination. You're riding the line between being creative and creating exercises for yourself and getting it into your muscle memory and incorporating the language under your fingers. Now, the fourth and final step in the transcription process for me is to practice applying it in the practice room. So I would pick some tunes and basically you're trying to cram it in there as much as humanly possible. It's not necessarily like you're trying to be 100% musical. You're trying to practice injecting this language wherever you can so that it starts to feel natural for you and it starts to become an internalized idea that'll just start coming out organically when you're actually on the bandstand. So maybe I'll give a demonstration of that. Okay, so I'm back. I've got my trusty iReal Pro play along, and I'm literally going to play 2 choruses on Mac the Knife and kind of show you this application step of the transcription process. I don't know, something like that. It wasn't the greatest example in the world, but you can hear that I'm just trying to apply that language and find ways to use it, and it starts becoming second nature. And I feel like this fourth step is really, really important. I can't stress that enough. If you skip it, the language doesn't have much hope of coming out on the bandstand. It has to become second nature. You have to know it like the back of your hand. And so if you're not practicing incorporating it in this way, it's not going to be the first thing that you think of. So that fourth step is really, really important. Anyway, that is enough of my ramblings for today. Thank you so much for checking it out. I hope it was useful for you guys. If you like the content, feel free to subscribe, leave a comment, say something nice or don't. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one.